I found everybody's nightmare lurking behind the trapdoor. Hello and welcome back to Noel's Retro Lab. A few episodes ago, we started the restoration of this Amiga 500. We did some cleaning up, some retro brighting, we installed the internal GoTech, and of course, we had to have a 16-bit dance party to go with it. Today we're going to continue with that restoration, and specifically, I'm going to be looking at the RAM expansion card that we found in the trapdoor, which had some scary looking battery corrosion. So the first order of business with this expansion card is to remove the battery. This tends to happen a lot in these old expansion cards with the Varta batteries. So if you have an Amiga that you haven't looked at for the last 30 years in the closet, open it up right now, because this is happening, and maybe here we'll be lucky and we won't have to repair anything. If you're unlucky, not only will you get damage in the card itself, but it will actually leak into the main Amiga board and it will potentially ruin it. There's this thing here, which I don't know what it is. It says jumper 1, but it's weird that it's only one lead. Usually jumpers have two to connect, so I'm not sure what that's about, and I don't know why it got so corroded. That's actually kind of strange. So anyway, let's get rid of this and let's see what kind of damage we have. Since it's very corroded, I'm going to put some flux. Hopefully that will help a bit. That's not some flux, that's a lot of flux. The joints were very corroded, so between all the flux and fresh solder, I'm barely able to get them to reflow again. But as soon as they do, then I can just use a weaken braid and suck it all away. Now I need to give it a good cleaning with alcohol just to even see what's going on in here. Okay, that's much more clear. It looks like there's a little leg of the battery that goes into that hole. So since there's no solder, hopefully I can just bend it. Or maybe there's still a little bit of solder, and I need to do it while it's hot. And like that. Oh, I think this might come right off. There we go. So next step is to give this a very good clean with alcohol initially, just to see what kind of damage we have. So it looks like we may have caught it just in time. I need to remove that solder blob in there. That looks really bad. And it's possible, maybe I see there's a trace going to this jumper, precisely. Maybe that's broken, so we can check that. But other than that, it looks pretty good. I think there's a little bit of minor corrosion there, but I don't think any of those tracks are affected. We'll double check, but I think we were just really lucky. So we'll do the same trick, apply a lot of flux, and try to melt the joint. There we go, and now wick it away. And yuck, that left some serious residue behind. It just goes to show how much damage the battery acid started causing already. And now time for another vigorous scrub. So this is looking much better, and I definitely see that there's some pads that were just corroded through and through. It looks like there was a pad in here, kind of like here, and this is completely gone. The rest of the top looks pretty good, and then on the bottom there were also a couple of pads that are gone, but in this one. But I'm hoping those are completely redundant and we don't need those. So for example, is this connected to this over here? And it looks that way. So that's great. And then this top via here connected to the resistor. Yeah, it's connected. So I think we were extremely lucky and we got here just in the nick of time. Give this 2 or 3 more years and we would probably start having some corroded tracks. Before we do anything else with this board, and since everything is socketed, let's make sure the chips are actually working correctly. No point in spending a long time fixing this just to find out that the RAM is faulty and I'm not sure I have replacements with me. And for this, I'm going to use, again, the Retro Chip Tester Professional. If you haven't seen the video about this one, I highly recommend it. It's a really cool project and it tests hundreds and hundreds of different ICs. And I'm sure it tests that RAM. I don't think it supports the real-time clock chip, but we'll definitely test the RAM. There you go. This is a 256K times 4 bits. Perfect. Now let's check out the others. Okay, fantastic. They all passed. So all those DRAM chips check out fine, and I'm gonna remove the real-time clock chip just to be able to work on the board without any problems. The next step is to actually find a replacement for the battery. Now, we could just go out and buy a similar battery, but the whole point of what we're trying to do is to avoid the sticky and potentially very dangerous mess. So we're going to avoid this kind of battery completely and try something else instead. This puts out 3.6 volts, and that's what the clock chip needs, but the range of voltage is actually wider than that. It turns out that the real-time clock chip works fine with 3 volts. Do we have any simple batteries that put out 3 volts? Yes, our lowly CR2032 that puts out exactly 3 volts, and the footprint is more or less the same. So let's try using this here, and as an added benefit, when this one is depleted, it will not make the mess that those other batteries did. CR2032 batteries have holders like this one in here, and they're perfect because just the battery goes in there, and then you just have the 2 terminals, a positive and a negative one. Very, very similar to what we had here before, except that, of course, the footprint is not the same. It's actually surprisingly close, but it's not the same. So I thought, okay, well, I'll make some kind of adapter. And I had even prepared some things ahead of time, like I can use some leftover prototype board and put this in here sideways, and then put some pins in the middle in the right place and solder those in place. And that would actually work. But as I was looking into this, there is a much, much simpler solution. Remember that all those 3 vias are connected. And so this is close to this footprint, but this one is exactly that footprint. So there you go. We have one going in here and the other one going in there. Now we need to make sure that we solder it correctly and all of that. So completely accidentally, I got one holder that I think is a perfect fit for this. So the other thing to watch out for is the polarity. So here we have clearly positive needs to be there, negative needs to be there. And interestingly, this is such a cheap holder that they don't say which one is positive and which one is negative. So you just need to look at the connections and figure it out yourself. So the CR2032 battery, the top is positive. So the top is positive. So this one is going to be negative, and this one is this one. So it will go like that. So we need to solder it that way. So before doing any soldering, I went to make sure that everything fits okay, and I'm glad I tested this because I had forgotten that components can't go over the PCB edge because the trapdoor of the Amiga is very tight. So as you can see, we can't connect it because this sticking out and it can't go in place. So we need to find a slightly different way to fit this so it doesn't stick out over the PCB at all. Fortunately, it looks like we can just use one of those other vias in there since all 3 of those are connected. And so instead of using this diagonal, we can use the other diagonal like that. You want to stay totally flush because there's that resistor there, but it doesn't matter. This is close enough to get the legs through the vias for the soldering, so that should work just fine. So here we're not going to be able to solder anything because the pad is completely missing. On the other hand, the connection is there, so all those 3 vias are connected. So I think what I'm going to do is just use something like that. This will help also with the electrical connection, and it will definitely hold it in place. So there you go, that is really solid. And let's check that the connections are correct. Positive should be connected to this, yes. And negative should be connected to this pin right here, perfect. So this is solid and the connections are right. However, there is one more thing we need to take care of.
There is another crucial difference between the CR2032 and the Varta battery. The Varta battery was intended to be charged while the computer was on, but if we do the same thing with the CR2032, we could end up with an explosive surprise. So it's probably better to avoid it. Looking at the CR2032 datasheet not only gives you all the specs you'd expect, there's even a section on how to correctly use it as a backup standby battery, which is exactly what we want. The first recommendation is to use a diode to make sure electricity only flows from the battery and not into it. So far, that's exactly what I expected, and it's what I was planning on doing. However, they also have another recommendation, and that's to use a protective resistance. That's just a last line of defense in case the diode fails. They have a chart with the maximum amount of current that should come into the battery, and then proceed to solve it for the case of 5 volts and a CR2032 model, which is exactly our case. How did they know I was going to be doing this? Anyway, so we'll go ahead with the value they came up with for the protective resistance, 200 ohms. It's important to note that having both a diode and a resistance, the voltage will drop a little bit, but that shouldn't be a problem since the battery outputs 3 volts and we can go as low as 2 volts. I expect the drop to be just about 0.2 volts or so, but we'll measure it later.
I couldn't find a schematic for this particular expansion. Most expansions don't seem to have published schematics, but you can sort of see what's going on. The 5 volt rail probably comes through here and comes through this diode. From here, it charges up the capacitor and it goes straight into the real-time clock chip. But also from here, it would go up here through this resistor and charge the original battery. And that's the bit we want to avoid. So we want, whenever there's no voltage here, we want current flowing from the battery to the chip without going that way. And then when there is 5 volts in here, we want it to go this way, but not go to the battery anymore. So what we're going to do is install a diode in here to make sure that current only flows this way. And then we'll also add a resistor as an extra protection in case the diode ever breaks down. So I'm going to remove this resistor since this is larger than what we want. And then right there, put both our diode and the resistor. We obviously need to be careful about the diode. We want the current to flow in the correct direction, so we want it to go from the battery out, so it should be this way. And then we can solder the diode and the resistor together right there. Not necessarily the prettiest solution ever. There are some pre-made boards that already have the diode built in and things like that, but this is very functional and it will certainly not get in the way of anything. We have plenty of room towards the back, nothing sticks out, so I think this is going to work great. We can even test that this is working correctly by seeing if we get enough voltage in the VCC pin of the real-time clock. So let's put our battery and measure the voltage between pin 20 and ground. And we have a healthy 2.9. So that's perfect. It's exactly what we're expecting. And this should be protected from the 5 volts from the main power supply. And while we're here, I showed a picture of this on Twitter, and a few people commented that they were a little concerned about this capacitor because the plastic wrapper is not exactly center and even. Now, I don't see it bulging necessarily. It could even be maybe some rubbing or who knows what. But you know what? It's just not worth taking a risk. This is a very common capacitor, so 47 microfarad, 16 volt. So let's just go ahead and replace those two capacitors just to make sure that everything is in perfect working order. Much better now. So I think we're ready to give it a test in the Amiga. Again, hopefully this should fit much better. Yeah, perfect. It just slides along the sides and our little add-on in there doesn't affect anything, so that fits great. And for now, I'm going to leave the switch dangling out because I want to experiment turning it on and off and see if it really enables and disables the RAM expansion or whether it switches the type of RAM that it expands. All right, let's try it.
The first thing I want to do is boot up into Workbench and see if the total memory available is higher than what we see with 512K. And yes, there we have 889 kilobytes free, which is about right. And while we're here, let's check out the real-time clock. From the shell, I can set the current date and time, but then I need to save it with the command setClock save. Now the real-time clock chip should have the correct date and time is updating in real time. So I'm going to shut down the machine for just a minute and start it back up again. So I noticed that it didn't automatically load the real-time clock time at startup because the startup sequence file isn't set correctly. So that's something I'll have to do later. So the date currently set in the computer is something pretty random, but then I can do a set clock load and it sets it correctly with the elapsed time. Another way to check this is with the excellent Amiga test kit by Keir Fraser, of Flash Floppy fame no less. There we can see that the program detects the full 1 megabyte of RAM, and we can run a soak test on it all night and make sure that everything works okay. And we can also go to the real-time clock section. We see that it detects it, and it even shows the correct time as well. So I'd say this is all working great. And what about that switch? Did it really turn off the RAM expansion completely? I'm going to turn it off and relaunch the Amiga test kit. And yeah, there you go. It's only 512 kilobytes of RAM, so I guess that just turns it off. To wrap it up, let's put the RAM to a practical use. One of my favorite games is Pinball Fantasies. I played a lot of hours of that, especially the tables Partyland and, of course, Stones and Bones. I can still hear all the sound effects in my head. Since Pinball Fantasies was released later in the Amiga lifecycle, in 1992 to be exact, it's one of those games that requires 1 megabyte to run. Although actually I read there's some kind of special version that runs on 512 kilobytes as well. Ah, that music, so many memories. But since I'm trying to run it with a RAM expansion off, it just hangs during the loading process. Okay, let's turn the RAM expansion back on and relaunch Pinball Fantasies. And right away we're greeted with an extra screen detecting the RAM. Loading continues as usual. And there you go. And now, it's time for some Partyland.
Well, there you have it. It took a little bit more effort to get the expansion card restored and fully functional, but I think it was worth it. Expanding the RAM to 1 megabyte, it's an essential upgrade on an Amiga 500, so that's great to have. And I'll say what I mentioned earlier. If you have an Amiga that's been stored in the attic for the last 20-30 years, please don't wait a day longer. Open it up, even if you don't plan on restoring it right away, at least remove the battery and neutralize any acid released. You'll thank me later. And that's it for today's episode. We're still not done with this Amiga. I still want to upgrade the power supply. I'm actually doing some of that right there. And then check out the Pi Storm with it. So fun times ahead. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting Noel's Retro Lab on Patreon or joining the membership on YouTube. Not only is that the best way to support this channel and allow me to continue making more videos, but you also get some extra perks like early access, ad-free videos, and more. Thank you again to all the supporters. See you next time.